Good afternoon, guys. I hope you're well. We continuing with our lovely lesson on networks. I hope you are learning a lot and you are actually researching on some of the issues that are involved when it comes to networks, right? So, just for today, we're going to talk about the software that is used in a network and the security that is involved. All right. But before we do that, we need to sort of like recap on the things that we've done so far. All right. Remember at the beginning on Monday, we spoke about that in a network, the components that you need in the network is the hardware, communication medium, and the software, right? So we spoke about the hardware, which is the devices, computer devices, and the computer devices are made up of clients and servers, right? We even touched on the different types of servers, file server, printer server, email server, proxy server, network server, and all those, right? And we even went further and said that a server is a powerful computer. What makes a server different from the rest of the computers? What makes a server different from a client? Now, remember, a server has to control a very big network, so it needs to have better specifications like larger memory, storage, and processing power. Right. Even in tomorrow's lesson, we're just going to look at storage and memory so that we can actually link these together with the servers, right? So thereafter, we spoke about the communication medium that you need, right? That in a network setup, there is a wired network and there is a wireless network, right? We further talked about the cables that you need in a wired network, that is the UTP cable. What does UTP stand for? Unshielded, twisted pair. We also spoke about fiber optic cable, which uses light to transfer data, and it's pretty fast compared to the. We even compared the two cables together. Then there's another cable that we spoke of, which is the gigabit, right? If you remember, the gigabit is the one that transfers like high volumes of data, and we mentioned bandwidth as well. Remember that in your revision, right? Then we also talked about the wireless one, predominantly the Wi-Fi, and we spoke of the standards, aids, the standards for wireless connections, some specifications that you need, right? Made up of numbers. So those numbers help you. All right. So now we want to look at, remember we said there are three components: hardware, communication media, and then the software. So now we want to look at the software part, right? And it's not really something that is complicated or out of this world. It's the normal software that we know with a bit of changes, right? So here in this lesson today, we're going to talk about the network software, network security. Then to wrap it all up, we're going to look at the advantages and disadvantages of networks, right? I know we could have spoken about these advantages and disadvantages at the beginning, but I thought maybe it's better after you understood the whole concept of networking, and then after you've understood the whole concept of networking, then we can actually talk of the advantage and disadvantage. Why would we need a network? What is the benefit? What is the drawback? All right, so moving on. All right, so the network software is the software that controls all the communication and security in a network. Remember what software does. the job of the software is to control the hardware. If you remember from your grade 10 studies, the basic job for software is to actually control how hardware should function. So similarly, the software that is used in a network is basically for making sure that the communication that happens between hardware devices occurs. And it should also provide some level of security. Remember, for you to access the network, you need to log in and probably put a password. So the software gives you that interface or gives you that ability to do that, to actually log in and access the resources of the network. So we're going to talk about that as we go with our lesson, right? So what happens is nowadays, most operating systems such as Windows come with built-in network capabilities. So what happens is when you get an operating system, I hope we remember what an operating system is. Operating system is part of system software, right? It actually manages all the activities that happen in a computer. So within that software, there are pieces of software that are embedded in operating system that helps a computer manage a network. That's why we say that a server is just like any other computer, but it has got superior specifications. It has got a higher capacity of hardware and RAM and processing power. But the software used on your computer right now, if you're using Windows or you're using Linux, you can actually have your computer converted to a server and the software. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to go, if you want to start networking, you need to go get extra piece of software. Although there are specialized server editions of the operating system that are installed on servers. Now, if you are going to have a situation whereby you've got hardcore type of thing, hardcore networking, where you've got so many computers and so many things happening in the network, it will be advisable to actually get the server edition of this operating system. What are we talking about? For example, you've heard of the operating system called Linux, right? Linux has its version of networking, the Apache, right? The Windows also has got its version also. It's called the Windows Server, right? So these editions they appear over the years, right? So Windows has been producing a lot of these over the years, and so these softwares are basically uh, designed to actually work on a server and operate a network. So that's basically the software that is needed. Sometimes it is referred to as the networking operating software. All right. So now let's talk about network security, right? So the operating system that will be installed in a network is basically meant to provide security as well. All right. So network security refers to the policies or rules put in place to ensure security of a network by preventing unauthorized access to information and misuse of the computer network. Right. So what are we talking about here is that whenever you have a network that has been established and you want your computers to work in a network environment, it is important that there are ways of protecting your information. Remember, information is not only protected by restricting people from accessing your information. There has to be some sort of ways to make sure that everyone understands what is meant to happen in a network. Hence, we're also going to talk about the logging in just now. We're going to talk about that as well. So it is important that in a networking environment, there are some sort of like rules that are meant to be followed by the users, right? So basic security in a network environment is log in and username. I'm sure in your computer right now you have a situation whereby you actually log in with a user account. Then from the user account you put in your password. So this user account is for you only, the person who's going to use the network. That's why even at school you have a situation whereby you actually have to log into your account in the school lab or something like that, and you put a password where all your web is protected. All right. So why do we need security in the first place, right? So the obvious one is to make sure you protect sensitive information of the organization, right? We have a situation whereby businesses are in competition. Let's take, for instance, an issue, the KFC against maybe Nando's, right? KFC has got its own way of making their chicken. So does Nando's, right? So these two organizations have got, let me call them trade secrets, right? Whereby they have got their recipes, and even no matter how hard you try to make it at home, it cannot be like your chicken can't be as crispy as the KFC one or the Nando's one. So this kind of information will be in the company's database, right? And the company has to be careful who accesses the information, right? So their systems have to be protected, their databases have to be protected, so that information like that, like secret recipes, cannot just go out to the public, right? Another thing, a company can have maybe a research and development. For example, let's take, for instance, a company like BMW, right? They've got their ways of making sure that their cars are competitive, right? People buy their cars, right? And there are probably things that they put on their engines, on their tires, or anything that has got to do with their car. So that type of information is not stored in people's heads. It is saved somewhere in the company servers. So as you can see, that security is very, very important, right? Security also applies to even government institutions, right? You have a government institution like the Department of Home Affairs, for example. It has a database of all the people in the country's details, their ID numbers, their, all those sort of things, right? So imagine if it is not protected enough, somebody accesses the database. It can be something out of this world. Yesterday we spoke about the ransomware, if you remember, if you, that whereby somebody gets into your system and hacks into that system and closes all the information and demands some sort of like payment. If you remember last year, sometime last year, is it this year or last year? I can't remember very well, but if you remember, there was hacking of the Johannesburg. I'm not too sure, but is it the municipality or something like that had happened, and somebody was demanding some sort of reward for opening the securities. I'm not too sure how it was resolved, but I think the authorities prevailed over that case. So you can actually read about, so security in a network. Oh, it's very, very important because it keeps sensitive information about organization, right? A username and password is a useful way of protecting the information, right? So what happens is that like we said earlier on, that you need to have some sort of people that are authorized to what to go through the network. So a username and the password is the best way to do that, right? So there you have it. Something like this is what operating system actually provide. They provide you with that interface whereby you can actually log in, right, as with your username and when you put a password. All right, so in a password protected environment, each user of the network is required to enter a username and a password to access the information, right? Remember, every network has got a network administrator, right? And what does the network administrator do? He's the one who actually manages the whole network. If there's a glitch, or there's a technical error, the network administrator is the one who comes in and makes sure that everything is working fine. One of his job also is to make sure that everyone who is authorized to use an organization's network gets a username and gets a password, right? Uh, a good example is maybe at your school right now, you've got or you have had somebody talking about SSMs. It's a government software that is meant to manage data at your schools, right? So now, this software is basically available to principals and teachers, personnel working at your school, but it's not available to learners, right? So why? Because the information that is there is pretty sensitive and it's got to do with your performance at school and all those things. Now, the administrator is the one who actually gives rise to who should log in, who should enter marks there, who should change information. So pretty much all networks have got administrators who actually generate usernames and provides people with the passwords. Even now, for you to access the lesson, you had to have some sort of like a username. Some of you got maybe messages to say as you can log in as guest, right? So that's what a username can do for you, right? But then we need to talk about a password, right? Now, you don't just think of a password. Yes, of course, you can actually write whatever you want in a password. But did you know that there are actually specific rules of creating a secure password? When we say a secure password, we're talking of a password that cannot be easily be guessed by somebody, right? Remember, out there are people who dedicate their lives to hacking into systems, right? Like I said yesterday, there are people who find joy in uh, getting into other people's stuff, even though you say you're protected. For example, a simple example is burglars, right? You might have all the alarm systems, but you find a situation whereby people come and rob your house, right? So while you are trying to fix your security, there are people who are also working on breaching your security, right? Hence, creating a password, you have to take this seriously. All right, so what are these specific rules of creating a password? All right. A good example of a password looks like this, right? And I'm sure you're wondering, like, how will I remember this password, right? So whenever you create a password, it is important that the moment you create it, you try to memorize it, right? So the first principle of creating a password is that a password should be 8 characters long, right? By 8 characters, as you can see, this one has got QP08LY. Those are the characters. If you count them, these ones are what? Are 9. Yes, this one has got 9 characters. So always make sure that your password is at least 8 characters long, right? This makes it difficult for people to guess your password, right? There is some software out there that is designed to crack passwords. An example is the one known as brute force. What this software does is that it tries so many combinations of characters to try and come up with the what with to try and come up with your password, right? Some of the softwares are successful, but uh, most of them they struggle, especially when you have created a secure password, right? Right. A password should be a mixture of upper and lowercase, right? That is, your password should have at least capital letters and small letters like that. You can see that's a capital letter Q and a small letter P, right? Capital letters LY, right? Then the other thing is your password should be a mixture of numbers and special characters, right? Like that. So whatever password that you come up with, right, it has to be something similar, right? The most important thing is that your password should actually be meaningless. Yes, I know you're actually asking how would I remember if it's meaningless? The fact that it's meaningless, it means it cannot be easily, you cannot easily guess it, right? So now we have a situation like you're in an exam, right? These are the things that you're asked. What are the characteristics of a secure password? 2 marks or 3 marks. These are the things that you should mention, right? Uh, Another thing is your password should not follow a specific pattern like AB3, ABC, or 123. Or usually people like putting their names, maybe James66 as passwords, right? So that is not advisable. Actually, sometimes it also depends with how much you want to protect your information. But whatever, the moment you find yourself wanting to put a password on your account, be it a Facebook account, Instagram account, the fact that you're putting a password, it means that you want your information to be secure. So these are the principles that you really need to take into consideration. All right. Now, what happens is sometimes you create a password and your password has got all the rules. It's alphanumeric, it's got capital letters, small letters, it has got symbols, it is more than 8 characters long. But still, there are things that even though you've done all those things, somebody can still get into your account. Why? Because you wouldn't have kept your password as a secret. No matter how secure your password is, uh, if you tell whoever cares to listen, then chances of your information being accessed by somebody is higher, right? Another thing is because the password is meaningless and you don't know how you're going to remember it, you're going to write it down somewhere. That's another error again. So it is always good that you sort of like memorize the password immediately when you've created it, right? You need to change your password frequently. That's another good practice. I'm sure some of you have had issues with people getting into the Wi-Fi at your house, or you're one of the people who has actually hacked into someone else's Wi-Fi, right? So it is always advisable to always frequently change your password so that your information is protected. Okay. Do not use the same password. What do we mean? Let's say you've got an Instagram account, you've got your laptop, you've got your Facebook account, your Twitter account. Usually people make the same password. Why? So that when they log into their email, they don't have the hassle to create another password, or it's easier to remember. Now, you have a situation, this is how serious you need to take your password. Like, you need to take a password seriously. I'll give you two scenarios. Imagine somebody gets into your Facebook account and starts saying things maybe that are unlawful, or things that are bad, or posts pictures that are not acceptable in the society. People won't know that your account has been hacked. They will assume it's you, and they will look at you in a different light. Another situation is, if you take the password lightly. Imagine you've got internet banking, right? And your password is not secure enough, right? You know, there are no prizes for guessing what happens if somebody gets hold of your details, right? You might wake up one day and all the money is gone, right? Then again, do not reuse a password, right? Just because we said you need to change your password frequently, it doesn't mean that you now have to the password that I used the last time, let me try it again, right? And I'm sure you've realized that in some applications, excuse me, in some applications, uh, when you try to use the password, it actually tells you that you have used this password before. All right. Now, so now you have we've spoken about the software that is needed in a network. We've also spoken about the authorization and passwords, and we've also spoken about how you create a secure password, right? So over and above passwords and user account, networks need some sort of like ethics. What are ethics? These are acceptable ways of behaving in a network, right? So when you have a network, or usually most networks, there is a need for a policy to use a network. Some of you might have had a chance to go to maybe an internet cafe, right? When you get to the internet cafe, there are rules that you give in there. You don't just do whatever you feel like. For example, you cannot download maybe movies, or you cannot download music willy-nilly at an internet cafe, right? Because the owner of the internet cafe has a policy against that, right? So this policy is known as an acceptable user policy, or is just abbreviated as AUP. An AUP outlines the rights and responsibilities of network use. So this is a document. I'm sure for some of you in your computer lab, there is something actually like that. Please do not confuse an acceptable user policy for networks with the one uh, for your computer lab whereby you're not allowed to eat and all those things. But basically, the document is more or less the same. Right. So what should be in this AUP is that all those that are permitted to use the network. They clearly know exactly what they're meant to do, and they also know what would happen to them if they don't follow the rules. And the most important thing is that these rules are actually meant to protect you as a user, not to make you feel like a prisoner, right? So what could be included in an AUP, right? We have promotion of basic netiquette. Netiquette is actually derived from the word etiquette, like the English word etiquette. The netiquette now comes as network etiquette, right? This is how, like, the respecting other people's files, and all those things. You cannot just go and format somebody else's computer or delete it. There has to be some sort of like respect amongst the users, right? So an AUP can have a list of those netiquette that people should follow, right? There can also be restriction on what can be accessed online, right? We all know that there are some websites that are a bit destructive, especially when you're at school and you're trying to learn. I'll give you a simple example of how destructive this is. Imagine you're working on your pet and you're under pressure. You know how it happens when you're working on your pet. You are suddenly under pressure out of the blue, and maybe you now need to use the internet. Then a group of people are actually maybe on Facebook or on YouTube streaming videos about maybe people dancing and stuff like that. Now, sometimes, if depending on the network strength, this actually slows down the internet, right? Your internet speed is slowed down because people are actually using more bandwidth watching videos on Facebook or on YouTube over things that are not really helpful. And now you are stressed, you haven't submitted your work, and you are trying to cover as much ground as you can. But then there are people that are actually wasting the bandwidth. So an acceptable user policy will actually have restrictions of what can be done. Some websites can actually be blocked, right? Download restrictions. This is the most common one. Which files can be downloaded? What is the limit? How many megabytes or gigabytes can you use? Right now, actually, I'm sure you are familiar with uh, an ISP, an internet service provider. What some internet service providers do is that they have a fair usage policy, right? That is, if excessive downloads are done, connection speeds may be throttled, right? What do we mean when we say connection speeds may be throttled? Remember when you sign up for an ISP, let's say you sign up for Web Africa, for example, or you sign up for MTN, Vodacom, right? There are packages that allows you to have unlimited data. They call it uncapped. Remember what a cap is? A cap is the amount of uh, data you can use over a specified period of time, which is usually monthly. So what happens is that some ISPs have got packages where you have got uncapped. Uncapped meaning that you can actually use as much data as you want. But the fair usage policy now comes in to say what is the average data that can be downloaded by a normal user, right? Maybe they say 200 gigabytes. They say no, if somebody downloads over 200 gigabytes, we don't know what they are doing, especially for home use. So now, if you download that over the limit, even if it's uncapped, right? They will start throttling. What is to throttle is that they reduce the speed that you have been accessing information. Now, when you now try to open some websites, they take longer, and this pretty much frustrates you and stuff like that. So, whenever you're dealing with an ISP, you need to actually find out what is their fair usage policy, right? Other things that can be in the acceptable user policy are the details of restriction about installing any hardware or software, right? Especially installing software. People have a tendency of wanting to install games on their computers, and see, those things actually put a strain on the computer's resources, right? So that's why some user policies actually ban such practices, especially in a network environment where there's an administrator. He's the one or she's the one who's responsible for what should be installed and what should be uninstalled, right? And the most important part also is that there should be clear consequences of violating conditions spelled out in the acceptable user policy. Maybe you are probably restricted from accessing the network again. That could be one of the consequences, and so forth. Or maybe if you download a lot, you might be required to pay for the data that you have used. Those are some of the examples of what can be an acceptable user policy. All right. Then this is something that we didn't touch on at the beginning of our lessons, right? Remember, we spoke about the local area network, we spoke about wide area network, personal area network. Then we talked about the wide area network, we said it's the internet, right? Then there is a version now called the intranet, not the inter, but the intra, right? Intra meaning within, right? This is a private network, and is an internet-like environment consisting of web pages resulting relating to the company's business. All right. What are we talking about here? This is a situation whereby a company has some sort of like an internet-like network. It works like the internet. It has got websites and web pages, but it can only be accessed by people from the organization or by people that have been given the authority, right? Remember, we said maybe you might be in a situation whereby, let's say your school has got a network environment and they also have an intranet. So you can now even access information just like on the internet, wherever you are at home and stuff like that. But the information that is found on an intranet, although it's worldwide, it's not accessible by other people. All right. So that's the intranet. All right. Then just to round it up, let us look at the advantages and disadvantages of a network, right? I'm sure as we went along, you were now getting the whole idea, right? So files are stored in a central computer, which makes it easier to manage. Software applications can be shared by users, right? You install a piece of software on the server and everyone runs from it. A single internet connection can be shared by users. Again, the internet connection comes from the server, then it's distributed to all the users in the network, right? It is easy to keep software such as antivirus software up to date. Remember, we said the network software also covers the security issues. So if you install the antivirus on the server, then it distribute the services to the rest of the networks to protect it. All right. Then the disadvantages, there are disadvantages. Networks can be expensive to install. If the file server is faulty, remember we said the server is the one that is centralized. If it's faulty, nobody can access the files. All right. Then in a local area network, it can be affected by interference, and then people can actually hack into the systems. Then, of course, the more computers are connected to the system, the more strained it becomes, right? So just to recap it all, our time is almost up. We say the software controls the communication and security. Networks may have acceptable user policies for conduct, and organization use intranets for more security, right? Then this is what I need you to do. If you get to pass papers for your activity, you can actually look at question number 5. This is where that is specifically for networks. All right. So we'll see you in our next lesson. And remember, we are going to talk about internet and browsing tomorrow. But remember that to follow us on social media, and don't forget to access other lessons as well. So I'll see you tomorrow. Have a lovely evening.